Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining this very timely webinar from RNLA on the left's lawfare against the Trump administration. We are joined by two eminent experts in this domain. But first, I will do a little housekeeping. I am co-chair of the RNLA and delighted to serve in that role. So it's part of my duty to let you know about all our great events coming up. Our big highlight event of the year is the National Policy Conference. That's coming up in a couple months, May 16th in Washington, D.C. But early bird registration is open now, so you can register and also look to sponsor for some lovely discounts. It's also corresponding with our 40th anniversary, so it'll be a particularly wonderful National Policy Conference this year. We have a lot of impressive elected officials who are going to be coming, folks both from the administration as well as state government. So it's going to be, and Congress, it's going to be a very good conference. So we hope you'll join up for that. And of course, go to rnla.org to do so, but also look at all our different programs that we have coming up. And of course, I also have to urge folks to become a member. If you're not yet a member, please consider joining. You get discounted access to these events. And of course, it's the premier network for Republican lawyers. So we hope you guys, if you're not a member out there in Cyberland, will consider joining. Okay, without further ado, we got some great guests lined up for you. Mike Davis, who you've probably seen a time or two on various news outlets, is the former chief counsel for nominations to Senate Judiciary Chair Chuck Grassley, who's still kicking in there and doing great work this Congress as well. Mike is the founder and president of the Article 3 Project, A3P, as some folks know it, which defends constitutionalist judges and the rule of law, of course. He also is the founding and managing partner of MRD Law. So he does practice law like many of us too. And he also leads the Internet Accountability Project, which helps to rein in big tech. And he also works on the Unsilenced Majority, an organization dedicated to opposing cancer culture and fighting back against the woke mob. And that helps explain, Mike, why I see you in so many different outlets with great messaging across the board, not just defending constitutionalist judges. So thank you for all your energy, which matches President Trump, it would seem. Greg Dulin is a senior litigation counsel at the New Civil Liberties Alliance, and he's an associate professor of law at the University of Baltimore School of Law, where his scholarship focuses on the intersection between patent law, constitutional law, and administrative law. I'm particularly interested in that because my daughter's a patent agent, so we like that area of law. He's authored multiple amicus briefs in various courts of appeals and, of course, the U.S. Supreme Court as well. He is routinely representing indigent defendants before the Fourth Circuit. And prior to NCLA, he was an associate justice himself of a Supreme Court, but in Palau. And earlier in my career, I represented the Palau Telecom Company. So that was very interesting. I always wanted to go there and scuba dive, but I never quite got there. But if it's worth it, I might finally take the trip.
It is the best place to scuba dive in the entire world.
All right, then seal the deal. All right, so Mike, turning to you.
Well, thank you for having me, Tricia, and good to be on here with you, Greg. Mark and Tricia Payletter, two of my favorites people in all the world, particularly Washington, D.C., so I appreciate this greatly. I'm just going to give a high-level overview of the lawfare that we're seeing by these activist judges, and then we can go into more detail if you want. You're all lawyers, so you know most of this. But here's my high-level points about this, that President Trump ran on a campaign pledge that he's going to hire Elon Musk, he's going to set up Doge, and he's going to cut waste, fraud, and abuse within the executive branch. And he is doing exactly what he campaigned on. He's actually doing the unthinkable in Washington, D.C., which is to do what you tell voters you're going to do, right? And it's kind of shocking to the people in Washington, D.C. And they don't have the House anymore. They don't have the Senate anymore. So they're running to activist judges and getting these ex parte temporary restraining orders with nationwide injunctions, which is just kind of shocking if you think about this. They're not even giving the Trump Justice Department the opportunity to argue. in many of these cases before they go in and get these ex parte TROs. And then they're extending these TROs with these activist judges. It's not just a couple days where they're doing these TROs. They're doing these TROs for like 2 weeks, right? And remember what President Trump is doing and not doing here. President Trump is using his core Article 2 executive power under the Constitution. He's not stealing Article 1 legislative power from Congress. He's not stealing Article 2 judicial power from the Supreme Court. He's using Article 2 power. And here's a couple examples. You had a judge issue a temporary restraining order saying that the President of the United States, his White House staff, including Elon Musk, who's part of the executive office of the president, who Elon Musk and Doge report to Susie Wiles, the White House chief of staff, according to the order establishing them. And even President Trump's Senate-confirmed Treasury Secretary can't look at Treasury payments. That's insane. I mean, not only does the president and his White House staff and his Treasury Secretary in particular have the right to look at these Treasury payments, he has the duty under the Constitution to look at these payments because he has the duty to take care that our laws are faithfully executed under Article 2. And taking care that our laws are faithfully executed includes, for example, ensuring that money appropriated by Congress is not being misspent on waste, fraud, and abuse, that money going to the UN relief effort in Gaza is not going to fund Hamas terrorism, right? And I know that Mark Paoletta, Trisha's awesome husband, has been talking about impoundment for a long time and whether it's constitutional or unconstitutional. But I would say this, at a minimum, if the president of the United States finds out that Congress has mistakenly appropriated money to the UN in Gaza that's being used to fund terrorism against Israeli and American citizens, the president not only has the right, he has the duty to stop that, both as under the take care clause as the chief executive officer. He also has the duty as commander in chief to make sure that we're not funding people who are going to murder American citizens in Israel, right? So that's one example. You also have Judge Carl Nichols, who is a Trump appointee in D.C., issuing a temporary restraining order saying that the president of the United States can't bring home overseas foreign service officers serving at USAID because Judge Carl Nichols thinks that 30 days is too short of a time. Apparently, Commander-in-Chief Carl thinks that you need 6 to 9 months or, whatever he thinks is the appropriate time. Apparently, these judges, if they can do this for USAID workers, they can also do this for CIA operatives or State Department officials, diplomats, maybe even the military. Who knows? Sorry, that Navy ship can't turn around and come back to the United States because Commander-in-Chief Carl on the D.C. District Court doesn't think that's enough time and it might be too disruptive. I mean, think about the path that these activist judges on both sides of the aisle are going down. This is a uniparty problem in D.C. It's shocking. It's appalling. And remember, there's recourse for these plaintiffs if they actually have standing to sue. For example, if you're an employee, a career official who's fired, and you think that you were improperly fired for political reasons, you can go to the Merit Systems Protection Board, right? If you are a contractor of the federal government, you think your contract was illegally or inappropriately canceled, there's recourse through the administrative agencies, and you go to the Court of Federal Claims, I believe. And that the issue is there's recourse. The recourse is not going to get an ex parte TRO from an activist judge with a nationwide injunction, and then the president is hobbled and can't use his core Article 2 powers under the Constitution for several weeks, several months, several years, who knows? There is a case pending right now before the Supreme Court on the emergency docket, and this is an important test for the Supreme Court because I always say these cases are so much bigger than Donald Trump and Trump derangement syndrome and whether you like Trump or you don't like Trump. If you're telling the president of the United States and his Treasury Secretary they can't look at Treasury payments, and that is upheld by the court for months, years, We have a major sabotaging of the president of the United States in exercising his executive power, including his duty to take care that laws are faithfully executed. So I'll leave it at that, and then Greg can jump in, and then we can go to questions.
Thank you, Mike, for pointing out some of the the salient dangers. How about you, Greg? What would you like to add to this?
Thanks for having me. And I think Mike gave an excellent introduction. And I'm rarely in a position to say it's actually worse than that. I'm kind of somebody who spends time in academia. I'm like, well, there's both sides, but it actually there's a couple of issues that Mike did not raise would make the situation even somewhat worse. And one is that not only do judges are now granting TROs, which may be bad enough, but they're granting this entirely entirely new animal, administrative stays. And administrative stays are something that some courts have started doing with respect to kind of to do some housekeeping within their own branch. So, for example, appeal comes in, and by the time you need to assign it to a panel, etc., and yet you need to just maintain status quo for 48 hours or 72 hours, something like that. And so it makes sense within the judicial branch to do a stay of a lower court decision while you're doing some housekeeping. But now judges, and even that there's been questions raised as to whether or not that's an appropriate thing, because it's not really a formalized stay. But now a number of judges have been issuing administrative stay of executive branch decisions, which is just weird, because you don't stay an action of a coordinate branch of government. You enjoin it if you have a grounds to do so, or you don't enjoin it if you don't have the grounds to do so. This administrative stay based on nothing, based on mere filing of a complaint, is entirely new. We have not seen it before, and it transfers enormous amount of power from the executive branch on these very core functions to the judges, and that's entirely unprecedented. And the Supreme Court should really put a stop, if nothing else, to at least to that. The other point that Mike raised is that not only are some of these TROs entered without a hearing, to be fair, some are entered with a hearing, very abbreviated, very quick, with not a lot of time to respond. But nevertheless, some judges do give an opportunity for the administration to say its piece. But the problem is that at least the position DC Circuit has taken, that they're not appealable, even if they do stop administration in its track from whether bringing foreign officers home, or examining the data in the Treasury Department, or replacing core executive branch officials. And the DC Circuit took this weird position saying, well, somebody essentially not fully being president for mere 2 weeks, it's not that big of a deal. And, that's just a very weird and unprecedented position to take. Usually preliminary injunctions are immediately appealable, but TROs that can last for 2 weeks and can be extended for 2 more weeks, so for a whole month, to divest. And again, whether it's Donald Trump or Joe Biden or whoever's going to be our next president, to divest a occupant of the Oval Office of his core constitutional power for 2 weeks or a month or even 2 days is hugely problematic. We've tried this before in 1970s when Justice Douglas tried to join the conduct of the Vietnam War. And back then, at least, every other justice in the Supreme Court thought that was utterly insane and overruled that injunction. And yet we're back here. It's not war, but these constitutional powers are equally core. Let me also just echo one thing that Mike said, but put maybe a slightly different spin on it. So New Civil Liberties Alliance filed a brief. I was counsel of record on it in the case of Besant versus Dellinger. That's where President Trump attempted or did fire a head of the Office of Special Counsel, and the district court judge reinstated him at least for these 2 weeks, possibly longer. The administration sought a immediate stay from the first DC Circuit, was denied, again, on this basis that TROs are not appealable. And now the Supreme Court. And Sarah Harris wrote an absolutely brilliant, spectacular brief, especially given the time frame. It blew me out of the, blew my mind. It was like that good of a brief. But New Civil Liberties Alliance filed an amicus brief, hopefully adding some points to it. And I think those points very much echo what Mike was saying before. we oftentimes say that the president has a duty to make sure that the laws are faithfully executed straight from the Constitution. But when we say it, we often think that that means, basically sending out prosecutors and FBI, et cetera, to arrest people who are breaking the law and making sure they're prosecuted and put in jail if they're convicted. But also in the meantime, deciding whether or not some prosecutions are worth it or not. But it's actually more than that. The power, not just the power, but the obligation to make sure that the laws are faithfully executed is not just prosecution. It's actually, as we put it in our brief, and quoting the Federalist Papers, that the president embodies the force of the nation. It's not just, it's not just prosecution, but it's the nation's entire action, strength, or force. And that includes all of these things, making sure that American citizens are not being attacked by Hamas terrorists and that Hamas terrorists are not getting the money. It ensures that, and again, we can certainly debate whether USAID is doing net positive on balance or net negative. Those are totally legitimate political debates. But those debates must occur in the constitutional context where the president has to embody and actually use this nation's strengths as promulgated by various agencies, whether it's USAID, State Department, Defense Department, etc. And having a judge, even with the best intentions, saying, look, I know better how to spread U.S. strength around the world with our foreign service officers, is just inappropriate. This federal judiciary must exercise judgment. Congress must exercise will to decide what they're going to spend money on, what they're not going to spend money on, what they're going to make legal or illegal. But this fourth and nation's strength must be reposed in the president, and it should not be interfered with by even very well-meaning judges. And some of them may be well-meaning and some may not be. But even assuming that, it's just an inappropriate place for them to be. And I'm very much hopeful that the Supreme Court will send a sufficient message to the lower court saying that this is no way to run a railroad. And so I'll just stop here.
All right, well, thank you, Greg. And it's definitely a hot button issue, generally lawfare, because we have a ton of questions that have already come in. So, and a couple of them, because you guys have been addressing, right, the constitutional framework, the founder's intent between, the Article 3, the judges and the president, but also with Congress, right? So a lot of questions have come in about Congress. Could Congress legally, constitutionally rule that that judges cannot do nationwide injunctions? We didn't actually talk about the nationwide injunctions, right? But and we'll get to TROs as well. But how about that? Would that be constitutional for Congress to say, no, judges, you cannot put these nationwide injunctions from this one narrow case or a case with perhaps international application, but not the domestic application? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't know how nationwide injunctions are constitutional because I don't understand how. I think we have a standing problem, right? When you're essentially allowing these judges to legislate when you're doing nationwide injunctions. But separate from that, what I have proposed, and of course I'm crazy, but that doesn't stop me. What I think needs to happen is I think that we have a problem with the D.C. District Court, right, where we have a bunch of radical Obama and Biden judges, and then the Trump judges are largely just utter wimps, right? And so it's you see this. I'm really perplexed, to put it nicely, with Carl Nichols's ruling. I think there's another explanation for it that I won't raise on here yet, but maybe a conflict of interest. But I would say this, that what I would propose, part of my, not only did I have to set up the conveyor belt and confirm Trump's judges when I was the chief counsel for nominations, part of my portfolio on the Senate Judiciary Committee was oversight of the courts. And I'll tell you, these DC courts have gotten out of control. And what I would propose is I think the DC Superior Court is unconstitutional. And I think that there are, there are like 10 or 11 vacancies on that. So let's just not fill that thing. And let's have the DC District Court judges actually do DC street crime so they can take over the DC Superior Court's function. And then maybe what we should think about doing for these cases that are not DC street crimes is using a lottery system and randomly drawing judges from around the country to sit by designation for these cases that don't involve DC street crimes, any case that has a national implication. So it's not just these left-wing radicals and then the Trump and Bush wimps who are deciding these cases, right? And then if you're going to do nationwide injunctions, maybe we do a 3-judge panel, right? If you're going to do we shouldn't have nationwide injunctions, but if we're going to do them, maybe we can curtail these judges' powers with nationwide injunctions, because we're seeing with these judges is they think they're the resistance now to President Trump, and they've actually deluded themselves into thinking that this is an important and proper role for them. And it's very dangerous what they're doing, right? It's like, Greg got into this, but if you're curtailing the president's Article 2 executive powers even for 2 minutes, let alone 2 weeks or 2 months, that is very dangerous. You are hobbling the president. He has the executive power, all executive power under Article 2 of the Constitution. And if these judges are going to use their offices, if they're going to take off their judicial robes and climb into the political arena and throw political punches, then I know at the Article 3 project, at least, we're going to throw political counterpunches. And that includes going after their jurisdiction or their power and going after their funding. It sounds like they have too much power and too much time on their hands.
Greg, anything to add there?
I'll just add a small point. So first of all, I agree with that, nationwide injunctions are highly problematic. And I think a number of justices on Supreme Court, Justice Gorsuch and Justice Thomas, have highlighted that in some of their concurrent opinions. So I actually don't think Congress needs to. It would be nice if Congress got involved and reaffirmed things that were true for 200 plus years. This whole nationwide injunction has been with us only for maybe a decade and a half at most. It just that didn't used to be how judges operated. Judges are meant to give relief to the party before them. And so they can say, look, this USAID officer cannot be fired, and we can, and then you take it on appeal, whether it's right or wrong. But you don't grant an injunction to people who are not before you. It's just, it creates all sorts of problems in terms of judge shopping. It creates problems in terms of judges ruling outside of their geographic jurisdiction, and potentially creates dueling injunctions. There was a case when during the first Trump administration where one judge, I think in DC, said you cannot cancel DACA, and so you're enjoined from doing so. And a different judge in Texas like, well, you cannot have DACA because it's unlawful. Well, what is the president supposed to do? Either way, he's going to be held, in theory, held in contempt. As opposed to if these were just local injunctions, then you can take it up on appeal through the relevant court of appeals and do it as a normal litigation.
Sounds like you're saying that ultimately the Supreme Court will address this, but I guess the viewer's question was, could Congress constitutionally limit the court's powers in terms of, relief?
I think they can, but as I was saying, I think they can in many ways. They're not really limiting the powers. They're simply restoring to what the understanding was for 200 years up until about, 2010s. There didn't used to be nationwide injunctions.
And the other, a number of questions on kind of the impact of legitimate uses of TROs, right? I mean, because of this huge broad use by a number of activist judges, is there a concern that they'll be restricted so much, that your run-of-your-mill, perhaps criminal cases won't be able to avail, lawyers won't be able to avail themselves of TROs?
But, what is the harm of saying that in a case of, for example, Hampton Dellinger, the terminated special counsel of the United States, not being able to get a TRO? If, let's assume hypothetically that the termination was unlawful, we can go through a regular litigation process and maybe he can be restored to office, although even that's a question. But if he's been deprived of his salary unlawfully because he was unlawfully removed, he can get it later on. It doesn't have to be today. It can be a month from now, a year from now. And, government will cut him a check for the salary that he should have been getting. And that's that. What's the rush of putting you back in office? Now, there are situations where TRO is necessary. Imagine there's impending execution or things like that, where you actually cannot solve the problem with money on the back end. But the problem is a lot of these TROs are solving problems that are generally not addressable in equity. They're addressable in law. And all it does is throw sand in the gears of the operation of the executive branch.
Anything to add there, Mike, on kind of the negative impact of legitimate use of TROs out of all these crazy cases?
Well, I think Sarah Harris did such an effective job on her brief, as Greg was saying, because she pointed out what they are doing. Like by reinstalling Dellinger, you are reinstalling an executive branch official against the president's will. Imagine that. Imagine if a law clerk, a disgruntled law clerk, got mad and said that, Justice Sotomayor was mean to her. And so Justice Sotomayor fires this law clerk. Can that law clerk go to a judge and say, Justice Sotomayor was being mean to me, and she shouldn't have fired me, so I want to get reinstated into Justice Sotomayor's chambers? I mean, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous that that would happen, that you reinstate a fired senior executive branch official. Any executive branch official, I think, shouldn't be able to be reinstated by the courts. As Greg was saying, there's recourse. There's recourse through monetary damages, right? Again, they're not being executed. You can go get another job. Maybe these Biden officials can't get another job, so their only recourse is to get reinstated. I get that, but here's the problem: these courts are. It's like what they did during the lawfare against Trump. They overused the judicial system, the legal system, to go after Trump, and it backfired. It backfired spectacularly. Well, in the form of it put President Trump back into the White House with Article 3 projects, great assistance over a 3-year period. But what's going to happen with these activist judges using and abusing these TROs is it's going to backfire. It's going to create a backlash where you're even going to see the Chief Justice, certainly no MAGA warrior, right? There's no Trump signs in his yard in Chevy Chase, I promise you. But you're going to see a backlash because they've gone too fast and too far and too much.
And on that point, at the highest level, kind of popular mainstream news, the places you haunt, Mike, like Fox News, you've heard commentators, oh, well, some of these will be, overturned. Some of them, much of this will be overturned by the Supreme Court. Some of the restrictions will, in fact, stick, and the president will lose on some of these. Any guesses on which ones will make it to the Supreme Court, and will they?
I would hope this. Unfortunately, as conservatives, we not only have to have the law right, we have to have the politics right, which is, it shouldn't have to work that way, but it does, particularly with the Chief Justice and maybe others, right? And so that's what I did during the lawfare against Trump. John Sauer was the law nerd who made the brilliant legal arguments, and I was the face for radio out there making the politics, right? Over 4,500 media hits supporting and defending Trump on presidential immunity. I'm trying to do that now, but I do think that these activist judges have gone so far. Like, for example, on the Treasury payments that the Treasury Secretary can't look at, or the U.S. Commander-in-Chief Carl telling Trump he can't bring home USAID Foreign Service officers on paid leave, returning them back to the United States. I think that that's going to be a bridge too far for even the chief. And so hopefully you'll start to see the Supreme Court using corrective measures through the emergency docket to make sure that this stops, because the alternative to this is going to be the judiciary, and I'll make damn sure this happens, the judiciary losing political legitimacy. And then when the judiciary loses political legitimacy, they lose power and they lose funding, right? So if we're going to have activist judges thinking they are going to be the resistance for against the president, then I'm going to be the resistance against those activist judges.
And in our last minute, Greg, you want to jump in and close?
Yeah, I'll just add, I know we're coming up on time. I'll just add 2 short points. One, I completely agree with Mike that, if the more judges do these sort of unprecedented things, the more it's going to get backfired. What made me, I started thinking about the Supreme Court reactions to a number of judges who were throwing roadblock and sand in the gears back in the late 80s and early 90s in death penalty cases. And eventually the Supreme Court said, look, we've had enough. And, that famous case coming from California said no further state shall be entered except to the direction of the Supreme Court. We don't even care what you have to say, just stop. Right. And I suspect maybe not that emphatic, but I think that might be happening as well. And as well as kind of, Mike is absolutely right that if the Supreme Court and if the lower courts start losing the faith of half the country, the courts don't have an army, they don't have the purse, they only operate on our trust in them. And if that trust is gone, that's going to be very sad. It's going to be terrible for the republic. And so the judges have to think of not just of, whether or not Donald Trump is a good president or a bad president from according to their lights, but what the country is going to look like from the judiciary's perspective 10, 20 years down the line. Will they have the ability to actually stop executive and legislative abuses of as opposed to merely being, resistance?
Those are excellent points. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for sharing your expertise. And thank you for your passion being out there. And everybody have a good weekend. And with that, we will wrap this up. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Tricia.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
See ya.
Bye-bye.